The challenges with the military and in Iraq and Afghanistan have been multifaceted. And when I was growing up, we had the Vietnam War. And war and conflict have changed so much over the years that now it doesn't look at all in Afghanistan or Iraq, or hopefully not, maybe Libya. It won't look the same as it did when we had these nice clean lines and we would advance in armies and they would advance in armies. And now it's an intermingled mass of insurgencies. So the reason I bring that up is that the injuries are different. And so in World War I, and we used to have what was called shell shock syndrome. And people knew what that was. In World War II, there was a certain number of days an individual would stay on active duty in World War II, and I think it was about 160 days. And at the end of 160 days, they had to be taken off the line. And they found that either they were, after that, either they were wounded, dead, or crazy. So that's what they came up with, 160 days. And the military has these, is very analytical. So you'll hear statements about, well, you don't have a concussion because you were not within 50 meters of the blast. And they don't care about how big the blast was or where it came from, but they're very analytical about those types of things. And the challenges were first to try to get past the differentiation between the Department of Defense and the VA and the different branches of the service. Because they're not very good at talking with each other to begin with. And second of all, the disabilities that are paid out for individuals that in the VA are much different than what I had envisioned for people with head injuries and with concussions. And people with post-traumatic stress were thought to be just weak and not have the, and we're trying to play the system and game the system and be malingerers to get this through. And if you were a Marine or a soldier and you were in Afghanistan, you wanted to perform at the highest level. This is now an all-volunteer army or all-volunteer service, whereas before in Vietnam we had draft people. People didn't want to be there. These kids want to be there. So the first big challenge was to, when I was asked to give a briefing at the Pentagon, was to try to try to advise the Vice Chief of the Army, Pete Corelli, and the then Vice Commandant of the Marine Corps, Jim Amos, what concussion was and how can you diagnose it. And I remember a dinner at General Corelli's house where we were discussing this, and I said, well, this is how you can image it. And this is what happens to the brain, and this is why it's vulnerable to second insults. And this is why you want to take individuals away from a football field, from a boxing match, or from a battlefield. And they looked at me and they said, we've never heard this before. And I said, I can remember telling them, I said, my father served in the Navy. He was a doctor. You've got great physicians here. This is not a problem. There's got to be some doctors that will help you with this. That's here in the military. And they asked me to give a briefing the very next day in the Pentagon. This was in 2009. And I gave that briefing. And the room had General Corelli and General Amos. And then it had their medical expertise staff, about 20 neurologists, psychiatrists around the room. And so I gave the same briefing about concussions. And then individuals would get up in the room and they would say, Dr. Hovde, we respect your authority and your expertise, but you don't understand, this is not a problem in the military. We don't have concussions in the military. And if you take individuals out and away from the battlefield or inside what they call inside the wire after a brain injury or a concussion, this is bad medicine. You're going to make things worse because you're going to label them as a brain injured person and they're going to perseverate and they're going to become a brain injured person. And I said, I respectfully disagree. And that ended up being a very loud debate which lasted for a long time. And so then Pete, General Crowley, and General Amos asked if I would put together a blue ribbon symposium of civilian expertise. And they did not want anybody in the military to be a part of this. And so we brought in what I felt were the best people that were here with the National Neurotrauma Society that knew concussions and traumatic brain injury. And also the best experts I knew of that did post-traumatic stress, because there's a lot of comorbidity between these two events. And then we held 2 sessions, and we put out a series of suggestions to them. And then they, through Admiral Mullins, they set out the orders and they implemented the program much quicker than. That's one of the beautiful things about the military. When somebody up high says we're going to do something, it actually happens, as opposed to in the National Football League where you have to have committees and figure out what you're going to do.